Not
I
unmuted.
got a phone call from Tom Enright this afternoon. You know, Tom's a pilot.
Yeah.
He flew over to these Amazon buildings. I will tell you.
Oh, have you driven down there?
Yeah, I've driven by it every day and every day I sort of have to swallow twice to make sure I don't throw up. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
We can see it from our offices very clearly.
but I have news for you. You can see it from my office.
Probably see it from coast.
It's, you know, I think you can see it from space.
Oh, you will be able.
Oh, yeah,
So yeah, Tom flies for some of the Condor.
he does. Yeah, he does. He works in volunteer organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was talking to him on the phone because National Geographic is gonna come take pictures of our ranches. Yeah, they reached out to us, and so they're coming in 2 weeks to interview Dick, Lawrence, Tom, and David Gill on regenerative agriculture, and they want pictures of various assembly companies that we have in Monterey County, so they've got it's a photojournalism situation that being in National Geographic.
Very good.
It was kind of nice.
Yeah. You know Joe Morris on Sound Logistics Fire?
I do not.
He does cattle grazing time for habitat.
Well, that's, they're going to him too.
Yeah.
He's the one who does
That's one of the-
he's doing the regenerative grazing thing.
Yeah.
They're going over and before they come see us.
This is one of the first people I've ever doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Really good at it.
And the other thing is, you know, we've got this guy with the army that gets in.
2 minutes or 1 minute or 3 minutes? to
Regenerative
make
grazing
Public
program down
comments?
in Camp Robbins.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna send an email tomorrow morning.
I'm not sure how Mike was planning to structure it, but I know probably 2 sucks. Well, that's for 3. I think it'll be more informal when we get to review the regulation.
Yeah.
It's fine, it's 25. No.
Mike, are we gonna do like a formal public comment section at the end? He was asking about time. What is he?
Well, they do. Public comment. That's concerns. They don't care.
There's more of a conversation every time we have meetings.
This is real local government. That's what this is. This is the right kind of local.
That's why we're at the county level.
There you go.
Yeah, whenever people tell me like, oh, everything's so crazy in the world, I'm like, oh, that's the problem, you focus on the local. Yeah. Everything's crazy on the local, but at least you were able to focus as people.
Do I have 601?
Yes.
Okay. I know that's not. Wasn't sure if it was a car or more in there. So let's go ahead. Right, so
Hi.
all right, let's vote.
Well, welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Moss Landing Climate Hazards Regulation meeting. There's some snacks and stuff in the back and water. Go for it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Scary. I'm an assistant planner for the County of Monterey. Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Katie Scary and I'm an assistant planner for the County of Monterey. Tonight, I'm joined by Phil Angelo, senior planner, as well as Mike Novo, management specialist. So for some quick housekeeping, first, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website, so then folks can go back and reference this video recording. Please sign in on the back table. There's a sign-in sheet that helps us track who's attending, as well as so we can get people to opt into the email, so then we can send out emails with updates for the Moss Landing Community Plan. Also, all participants' audio and video are automatically turned off to help with the bandwidth of this meeting tonight. And lastly, the layout of the slides and videos of the panelists is controlled by folks on Zoom. So any individual can change it to match however they want it to be laid out. And if you're participating over Zoom or by phone, please follow the following directions. Press *9 to indicate you would like to speak. Listen to the message. The host would like you to unmute your microphone, as well as you would press *6 to unmute. When you're done with your comment, press *6 to mute yourself again. Again, if you're participating on Zoom, there will be a raise hand icon in order to be added to the queue to speak. Please see the screen for the example listed. A message icon will pop up and you'll be able to select unmute myself. I'm now going to be passing it over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Katie. So hi, I'm Phil. For many of you that have been involved in the Moss Landing Community Plan for quite a while, this is going to be review. But the community plan was adopted in 1982 as a chapter of the North County Land Use Plan. Both apply in Moss Landing. The Moss Landing community plan policies are kind of a more focused view of the appropriate land uses and planning issues in Moss Landing, like infrastructure. Most relevant to today's meeting is that the new draft community plan would include policies on how climate change hazards would be addressed in development applications. So the county's been working to update this plan for many years, and we think it's in the final steps to get it over the finish line. And one of those is drafting coastal implementation plan regulations. And those are essentially the detailed ordinances and codes that would implement the plan. So as an example, we have a plan policy that says that development to the maximum extent feasible be sited, designed, and constructed to avoid effects of coastal hazards, including flooding and erosion. And the coastal implementation plan regulations would give the nuts and bolts of like what that looks like, what kind of technical reports you need to submit, permitting requirements, and things like that. And this is the Moss Landing Community Plan area, which is where the community plan policies would apply. These are some images from a 2017 Moss Landing Coastal Climate Change Vulnerability Report. I think like you have
talk about those.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you may recall, for those of you that've been here before, we had a 2017 Moss Landing vulnerability assessment done that focused on the whole community plan area. And there was a report put out, Central Coast Wetlands Group. We had one of the doctors from this institution help with that report together. That showed pretty much that Moss Landing is obviously threatened by sea level rise, inland flooding, storm surge, waves, king tides. We all know about those too. So we have an assessment that shows that a lot of the areas within the community, except mostly the cemetery and the neighborhood at the south end of town, are threatened by climate change. And so that's really the focus of tonight's meeting. This information was based on a 2012 study. 2012 information. And it was a 2017 report. Since then, the California Ocean Protection Council has put some new data out showing, updating all the information as of 2024. The risk in the shorter term has lessened, but the risk over till 2100 has actually gone up. So there's still a lot of data that's constantly moving on this, but there is a risk to the community. We know that there's going to be flooding happening. It may be farther out than we expect, but we know that it is on the horizon. Is it the up and down arrows or?
Yeah.
I'm not hitting right now.
Sorry, bear with us. Not.
Oh. Do we have this up? Okay. And for those of you that may want to just experiment with different levels of activity along the coast, there's these, this is the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Sea Level Rise Viewer. You can just type in sea level rise calculator in a web browser, and this will pop up. And you can play with different levels of sea level rise. And zoom into your community first. You can do this anywhere along the coast. And you can experiment with different levels. By year 2100, we're expected to have 7.7 feet, potentially as the worst case scenario. I want to caution you, there's a range, but the worst case scenario is 7.7 feet of sea level rise by year 2100, which, as you can see, except for the industrial areas, pretty much inundates the community. So that's why we are working so hard on these regulations to try and figure out how we're gonna deal with development between now and the year 2100. So I'd encourage you to go in and look at that viewer for wherever you live or wherever you're interested. It's a great tool, gives you broad level analysis. It doesn't give you any precision because it doesn't take into account structures, such as seawalls, things like that, but it does give you a broad level analysis. So, I would encourage you to go, if you're interested, go look at it and play with it. So we're gonna go back to Phil.
Or the neighborhood not on the, graph on the picture.
It's right here. We just had it zoomed down. The neighborhood, I think, see, it doesn't really get water until way after 8 feet.
Hey, everyone, is the microphone better?
Yes.
So before Mike regales us with details about the regulations, we wanted to kind of contextualize them. They'd be addressing topics including rising tides, but then also other hazards that are exacerbated by climate change, such as flooding, dune erosion, and then how those hazards interrelate. And they would be implementing the draft community plan policies. We included the relevant policies on the slides, but we're not going to read all of the text. So I'll go through these quickly and just kind of summarize some of the major ones. One of them is that the county monitor the latest information on climate change effects to ensure it's included when evaluating projects. The other is that development be cited and designed to the maximum extent feasible to avoid effects from coastal hazards, including flooding and erosion. And there are several subcomponents to this, including that the new development be designed in a way that allows structural integrity without reliance of shoreline protected devices, or substantial alterations of natural landforms such as the shoreline, that it not significantly contribute to erosion or geologic instability of the site or the surrounding areas. And then the sub-bullet B, which is quite large, is an exception that allows more minor development like a public trail, benches, gazebos, patios, or raised decks to be located seaward of a shoreline setback where this could be potentially in a flooding or coastal hazard area, but because it's minor, it could be removed later. And then this is one that would require that development in coastal hazard areas be required as a condition of approval to record a deed restriction describing what hazards it's subject to, including limitations on the right of property owners to protect property from such hazards. When new analysis would need to be conducted. For example, if in review of a development application, the original geological report says in 20 years, this property might be threatened by shoreline erosion, that would then be folded into the condition of, okay, in 20, 30 years, or if it's the shore is within 5 feet of the site, then it needs to be reevaluated. And then applicable development, adaptation and relocation, removal, restoration requirements. This is a similar policy limiting development in coastal hazard areas. And then these next couple of policies all relate to long-term planning. That goes kind of beyond the regulations that we're talking about tonight. one of them being requiring preparation of a shoreline and harbor adaptation plan. And that the county supports armoring in certain locations in order to protect both the harbor and the community. Recognizing the critical utility of Highway 1. And I realize I'm moving through these very quickly. The presentation with all of these is going to be posted on our website, as well as the full plan that includes the language of all of these plan policies. And then specific criteria on when shoreline protective devices like a seawall or revetment are proposed.
Back to me.
Want to take it away, Mike?
I will. And I think Phil's kind of underplaying one aspect of the plan policies. He worked very hard on a grant to get funding for us to do a shoreline and harbor. Shoreline and is it harbor?
Yes.
Adaptation study. So we will be commencing the work on that in the next few months, I believe. Phil can tell me for sure, but we will have a thorough study for the Moss Landing community coming out of that grant. So thank you, Phil, for getting all that work together. Katie helped with that as well. I want to talk a little bit about what we're here for tonight. So we wrote regulations to help deal with climate change hazards for the community. We took what the Coastal Commission has pretty much recommended in other jurisdictions, because we have to get our plans certified by the Coastal Commission. If they do not approve of what we write, then we don't move forward with this plan. So we're trying to find a balanced approach that meets the Coastal Commission's needs, which really is the Coastal Act's needs, but also meets the needs of the local community. So what we've crafted and put in front of you tonight, well, I think we distributed about a month ago, is a set of regulations that we think will pass muster with the Coastal Commission. It is a strict set of regulations. It does have some development restrictions on property. If you are in a hazard area, you're gonna have to design around those hazards. And there are some restrictions through the conditions of approval that are very strict as well. So I really encourage you to really read carefully what's in our 11 pages of regulations. It does have significant issues for the community, and we really want to hear from you and find something that works for the Coastal Commission and for the community. So we're going to talk today about where the applicable locations are for kind of where the hazards are in the community. We're going to talk about the triggers for a coastal hazard report and what the requirements are for that report. We're going to talk about some development standards we've set up, both general development standards for developing within a hazardous area, but also when and when you can't use shoreline protective devices, and then also address legal non-conforming uses. We have a couple cleanup items to make sure that coastal hazards are incorporated into the legal non-conforming section of our ordinance. So, and if you want to talk while I'm talking and ask questions during this, I'd be happy to do that. I'd rather have this be a conversation than me just lecturing, but what we're really walking through you tonight is the ordinance that we put together. So if you have any questions as we go through these sections, feel free to jump up and ask away. So our first section of the ordinance is section D1, and it talks about the areas where you're going to need to do some kind of hazards analysis. And it constitutes all the industrial and commercial areas within the community, the public and quasi-public areas, which is the Harbor District and used to be the school property, but I think that's now no longer PQP, but the post office, some of the recreation areas are considered in the open space districts. It also is triggered by risk areas. If you're in a floodplain or a tsunami run-up zone, or if there's a geologic hazard, that could also trigger a coastal hazard report. What we're trying to do is exempt the Potrero community, the Potrero neighborhood, the residential neighbors down there from having to do a report. There is one edge of that neighborhood on the west side that is, I guess, the tsunami run-up zone laps up against the neighborhood. So we're thinking about ways to really minimize the issue for the neighbors there. We may just have them do a memorandum if they're in that tsunami run-up area, rather than doing a full-blown coastal report. And the reason for that is they're small parcels, they're residential parcels. There's not a lot of flexibility in design or location within those properties. So really, I think the engineer has a very straightforward analysis to do on the hazard there. So I think we can minimize the type of report that's needed there. The cemetery, as you saw on the coastal viewers as well, is a high level area. We are in a high level area here. We're outside of the coastal hazard zone here as well. But most of the rest of the community is in a hazard area. Yes,
Point of clarification, just to be clear, when you say who is doing the coastal report, who would that be? And maybe it differs from scenarios, but.
Sure. Yeah, so when an applicant, a property owner comes in to apply for development of something on their property, either a land use or they want to develop a building on their property, these types of regulations are triggered. And the reports are required of the applicant to have them hire an engineer to do the research to identify what the hazards are. So it would be a burden on the property owners or the project applicant to do this. That's why I want you all to very carefully read this ordinance. Thank you for asking that. Yeah.
And I guess we're gonna interrupt you, Mike, if we get a hand raise on the Zoom as well.
Oh, sorry.
They can participate, but I get to add to that, most often what I've seen in the reviews is it's a geologist or an engineering geologist. Or it could be a coastal geotechnical engineer that has specialization in this kind of specific work.
So the first major section of the draft regulations is the requirement for a coastal hazard report. Again, it depends on the location. There are also certain types of projects that are listed in the ordinance that will trigger the development of a coastal hazard report, such as major erosion control structures, shoreline protective devices, things like that will also trigger the need for a coastal hazard report. So look for both of those. If you're a property owner that's not in the residential neighborhood, you want to look at the location characteristics, but then if you're looking for some major structures, you might also be triggered through a project type. Then what we have is a less significant or less substantial report analysis that has to be done that we're calling a memorandum. And that's where the engineer does a first screening and decides this is not a substantial risk property or substantial risk project. And we can just do a memorandum that would explain all the issues to the county staff and to the county decision makers so that we can provide a good analysis to our planning commission and board of supervisors. And then again, there's no study required for certain locations. And then for minor structures, we also have an exemption that says if you're planning, state parks was here, I don't know if they are tonight, but if they're planning like trails, removable structures, signage, those are minor structures that would not need a coastal hazard study. So you start getting into the details of the draft regulations. There's a section D1G through I that says what a coastal hazard report has to contain. And it, as Phil pointed out, it's prepared by an engineer. It's going to look at the life of the project. So it's going to look at, let's say you're building a home, you expect a 75-year life out of it. It's going to look at what the sea level rise projections are and coastal hazards are going to be over that 75-year life. Try and predict what the end is going to look like and design the project around that. So it actually, even though it's great information for the county and our decision makers, it's actually good information for the applicants as well, so they can design the project to withstand a coastal hazard. If you look at, there's a table in our draft regulations on page 3. That table is an example, a snapshot today of what we expect the sea level rise to be over the next few decades. As I pointed out, that information is constantly changing. So you'll be using the best available science when you come in for a development project. But at the end of that table, there's some text that identifies the risk category. So depending on the type of project you're building or the life of the project expectancy, you will pick a risk category, or the engineer will pick a risk category to do the analysis. And there's a intermediate high, and a high level. Yes, Kate.
We have someone on Zoom that would like to speak.
Okay, go ahead, whoever's on Zoom.
Yes, you're talking about the neighborhood not being affected, but what about our infrastructure, like sewer, underground utilities?
Yeah, those are issues for us to deal with as planners. We don't want to put the burden on the neighborhood of having to do an analysis of that, but it is us as planners and in our decision-making planning commission board to wrestle with those issues. If the neighborhood's gonna get cut off because of sea level rise or some other flooding or the infrastructure is gonna be compromised, that's something we'll be analyzing as we go forward. But that's more on the county to do that analysis, we don't want to put that on the property owner. So that's the concept. So again, you're projecting the hazards over the life of the project, or the engineer is. You're gonna use their recommendations on design to try and avoid impacts during the life of that project. And subsection I in section D1 does have a detailed list of what has to be in a coastal hazard report. And moving to the next section, this is section D2. This is our development standards section. This is kind of lays out the path for how the planners are going to analyze what is proposed. It's going to lay out procedures for the applicant as well. It recommends that you pull in all the recommendations from your engineer into your project design. And if you can't do that, then we need to understand why that would be. There are findings required for our decision-making bodies in that section. We have conditions of approval that are required depending on if there's a hazard on the property or not. It requires that you adopt all feasible mitigation measures, which is required by CEQA anyway, the California Environmental Quality Act. It does require a deed restriction if you have hazards on the property. That's going to restrict parts of your property potentially from future development. If you have a hazard on one part of your property and you're able to develop another part. Again, goes to the next step as well. Non-developable areas will be protected through those processes. And then also has procedures for removal in case a hazard does destroy or damage the structure that's being permitted through the county. It has a process laid out in there. So again, these are very strict regulations, probably the strictest we have, maybe except Big Sur. But so I really want you to really dive into these things and give us written comments if you can do so, or if you want to talk to us, we'll be happy to meet with you as well. There is a notice that gets recorded on the property if you're in a coastal hazard area and you have hazards that will disclose those hazards to the current property owner as well as future property owners. Kind of continuing with the development standards section. Again, this is section D2 of the draft ordinance. It has a section that talks about when you can use shoreline protective devices. It does describe how you can do minor development that is in a coastal hazard area. It talks about how you remove structures when they're damaged. And here's one of the strict ones, again, where it waives your rights to future shoreline protection. This is something that came from the Coastal Commission on some other regulations they've been reviewing recently, and we've included those in here because we do need to get certified through the Coastal Commission. But they essentially say if you are issued a permit today and in the future it's determined that you need a shoreline protective device to protect that structure, this essentially says I'm waiving my rights to do that, and I'm going to let essentially nature take its course. So that's a very difficult and strict regulation. So again, please review these carefully. For hazard areas, we may be putting conservation easements on portions of property. Those are areas where your property is restricted from doing any development. And then we have an overall restriction about protecting the dunes in the community. Section D3 is specifically on shoreline protective devices. You can only do shoreline protective devices under 2 scenarios under the Coastal Act, and there are maybe some minor exceptions to that, but the 2 major provisions are, it has to be a coastal dependent use. The other provision is it has to be an existing use. The Coastal Commission takes the position that existing is defined as 1976, when the Coastal Act was adopted. So if your structure was in place before 1976, you do qualify to put up a protective device. If it's existing at the time that you come in to apply for a permit, in let's say 2025, the Coastal Commission does not consider that existing. You have to go back to the Coastal Act initiation of 1976 to be considered existing. I will point out that is in litigation right now. But I believe it was upheld at one court level, so we will see where that goes, but that is again, one of the very strict provisions of this ordinance. We do not define existing in our ordinance because of that very reason. It may change with whatever court decision comes out. The one benefit for the community, you can thank the Harbor District for being here. Not the Harbor District itself, but the harbor for being here. Because the harbor is a coastal dependent use, any protection of the harbor is gonna end up protecting the community, or will likely protect the community. So I know the harbor is gonna do what they can to protect the harbor in place as long as they can. They may have to move in at some point in time too, not in my lifetime, I can guarantee you that, but perhaps sometime in the distant future. And, but as long as the harbor is here, it's gonna be protecting its resources. And I think that really is a benefit to the community because it helps protect the community. So in the shoreline protective devices section D3, we have standards listed in subsection B in that, if you're interested in that. It talks about that while we're even allowing shoreline protective devices, we're still gonna be protecting resources. We have a lot of resource protection policies. There's a preference for non-structural design. In other words, what they call soft armoring, using sand, vegetation, things like that, grading, maybe even controlling water flows, depending on the size of what you're dealing with, to protect the shoreline from erosion. And then the hard armoring, the seawalls, the riprap, things like that, really come after it's determined that soft armoring will not work. So the Coastal Commission also is emphasizing trying to design shoreline protective devices at a landscape scale, not doing it just for your property, but thinking of the whole stretch of beach when you're designing it. And has a very strict requirement that we avoid impacts on shoreline sand supply. We want to make sure that we're preserving that so that other near and distant properties aren't affected by whatever armoring we do approve. And also a preservation for public access. That's one of the keys of the Coastal Act, is to preserve public access. And when we do shoreline armoring structures, we're going to be looking at access opportunities as well. And then there are conditions of approval that relate to shoreline protective devices. That's in subsection C of that set of regulations. Mark.
Has the Coastal Commission staff referenced anything related to beach nourishment projects? It
We
appears,
can't hear the questions.
Yeah, I can repeat the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Del Piero asked if the coastal commission has made reference to any shoreline beach nourishment projects. And I would say not specifically in relation to our regulations. We've certainly talked to them about it in general before, but, trying to think if there's anything really specific in our current conversations with them, and I can't think of any.
It struck me that they're,
Do you want to begin to that?
After reviewing everything, it struck me they're long on prohibitions and short on, things that might remedy the loss of, the sand dune habitat on both the north and south side of the harbor mouth.
Yeah, and along those lines, the soft armoring they talk about, and we encourage as well, can include beach nourishment. So we've certainly had that conversation in that context, but there's nothing real specific in the regulations about it. So the next section of our draft regulations is kind of miscellaneous catch-all area where we have a discussion on non-conforming structures and how if there's a structure that's, let's say, was built in 2000 and is damaged by rising tides, storm surge, things like that. It deals with how or if you can rebuild those structures. So that's section D4. So if you have an existing business or property that is in a hazardous area, you'll definitely want to look at that section. It can have significant implications for if you are damaged, how you can kind of recoup your loss. We also have companion changes to our zoning ordinance, which is Title 20. That's part 1 of our zoning ordinance. We have to make all of our ordinance consistent throughout, so we're making some minor changes to part 1 in a density of development, in our coastal development permit exemptions section, and in our non-conforming regulations to make sure we're recognizing coastal hazards in those sections. In the coastal development permit exemptions section, that's a key one, in that if you are in a coastal hazard area, this provision would keep you, or would require that you still get a coastal development permit because you have that potential hazard. I'm gonna move this back to Katie and we can have a conversation on informal or formal about all the regulations. Hopefully you've all picked up our slides. They're on the table over here. Our draft regulations are on the table over here as well. You'll find out in a minute that we're giving you a couple more weeks to comment. So thank you.
So all public comment for the draft climate hazard policies are due by the end of the month, which will be April 30th. And that, I believe, is not next Wednesday, but the week after. And please see the last page on the handout in order to access the contact details. It will be on the PowerPoint slides that are printed out, as well as the agenda. Also, we wanted to flag that on April 22nd, next Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors will be doing their update on the Vistra fire to provide the community with an update on that.
When will that be meeting be at?
It hasn't been finalized yet.
I can see that.
I'm not sure if we have that. We're checking.
We'll get the details for when that will be finalized. Oh, someone in the back knows.
It's okay. So any member of the public can go on the County of Monterey website. And you just go to the government tab at the top and it's gonna drop down a whole bunch of options. You go to agendas, minutes, it's kind of over, I'm visual, so over on the left at the bottom. And you can access it's Legistar is the tool. And that's where all of the agendas are posted. So that they go out, the agenda usually is posted by 5 p.m. on Thursday for the following Tuesday meeting. And then you just want to kind of watch, they do revise the agendas, they will update them as late as Monday. That's rare, that doesn't usually get pushed that far out. But you can access the agendas yourself, and on that agenda is all your Zoom links and the way to join by phone and so forth.
And we should point out, you're probably all aware, but there is a county webpage that focuses on the Vista Fire as well. So
Yes.
if you need to track information, there's a lot of information.
There's a banner at the very top of the county website. You just click there and it goes to the updates for, that the county is providing through environmental health and through public works and through DEM, Department of Emergency Management. There's also a page for Vistra. Vistra has a page too for the fire updates.
So for those of you who don't know, Vera is Supervisor Church's aide, so thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. And we have a question right here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if it's possible for them to say when the meeting is, even before the agenda is ready, that'd be really helpful.
It's always Tuesday, starting at 10:30 in the morning.
Oh, even for the monthly Vistra fire?
That will vary depending on what scheduled matters are on the agenda. We don't know that definitively until Thursday at 5.
Gosh.
Yeah. Neither do us staff, so.
Yeah, neither does the staff. It's a big surprise for everyone.
Well, I was gonna say, because they're regularly, the meetings are gonna be every month, if we could just know in advance, so we could prepare our schedules and be ready to
That
attend.
might be,
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that either.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it'd be nice if it was regular, like they have them for the supervisor meetings, because I love that, 10:30 AM, you know.
well, they usually have a 10:30 AM group and a 1:30 PM group. And so those are the two options generally, so it's one or the other, but as she pointed out, we don't know until Thursday which group you're gonna fall into. But I understand your comment, thank you.
And then, I don't know if we're allowed to make comments about the handout that you gave us. But there was just one section in particular that I found concerning. It's 4DB, page 11. And, it has to do with rebuilding after a disaster, right? And I understand, you know, rebuilding after wildfire damage, but this just says, damage by fire. And I'm just kind of concerned that structures that were designed improperly that might have caught fire and burned will be allowed to rebuild using that same design the way that this section is worded. And so I think there needs, you know, for houses, that makes sense. But for, let's say, heavy industry where their standards are constantly changing and being updated, I think there needs to be more nuance to this section.
So maybe something like making sure it meets current codes at the time that they apply for reconstruction, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that might be required anyway, but we'll make sure that the language is clear.
We have someone on Zoom, so we'll answer them and then I'll get over back to you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I appreciate you guys putting this together and putting this assessment together. I've been a resident of the harbor for 5 years now, working out of the harbor for about 15 years. But I too am very concerned about how this plays into the permitting involving the PG&E and Vistra and Tesla battery storage vicinity, and an environmental assessment as required for that industrialization and the risks of that zone. Are these measures also going to apply to them, even though they identify as a energy facility?
If you mean, will these climate change regulations that we're proposing tonight apply to them? The answer is yes. They are situated though, at least 10 feet above sea level, so they're really kind of not in a hazardous zone, but because they're an industrial facility that can have a pretty big footprint, we've included them in the triggers for doing coastal hazards report. So yes, they would have to apply to these regulations.
I'm Ed Mitchell. I'm a co-founder of Never Again Moss Landing. I'm deeply involved in investigating what happened, how and why. I'm here as a friend of the planning commission. Specifically, Mike, I've worked with you in the past and I trust what you do, and I don't think there's anything deliberate that occurred here. But in this I'm advising you to stay out of a very nasty food fight, which is about the rebuilding of the Vistra building that burned down. I'm gonna read the paragraph that we're eagle-eyed about, and it's a place where you all stumbled. It's on page 11, paragraph B. The purpose of this section is to identify the standards for allowing the restoration or reconstruction of a structure that is located in an area subject to the coastal hazard. Fine, but it goes on to say that is damaged by fire. It doesn't say damaged by coastal fire. And the question becomes, well, what type of fires could that be? Well, there are ones that have occurred because of internal origin fires. They had nothing to do with the hazard. Just because they're parked here, it should not come across legally that you as planning commission is approving that type of structure to be rebuilt. It's way ahead of the months from now when PG&E investigation team will deliver their first findings to the county. So I believe there's very simple ways to fix this. One, in section D1, area of applicability, you could say that this policy, this updated plan is not applicable to buildings or structures damaged or destroyed before the approval date of this document. That's a simple way of doing it. On that particular page that I talked about, state coastal fire hazard there. Another way of doing it is none of this community plan applies to the January 16th Vistra Energy battery storage fire or building or rebuilding of that storage facility. I gave you the first one, and a very simple one to fix. Stay out of the food fight. It will get nasty.
We appreciate and definitely conceptualize that it's gonna be nasty. We can be very specific in these regulations as well and make sure that we, and just thinking what you said, we may not wanna have this section B is applicable to industrial at all.
Yes, sir.
You know, so it may be something more like that. So we'll think of some options. The intent here is that if somebody, one of the commercial structures downtown gets damaged by whatever cause, fire or whatever, we don't want to penalize that. But, you know, you're talking about big facilities across the highway, so I think we can figure out a way to ensure that the smaller operators are protected through these regulations and still not give carte blanche to some of the larger industrial areas.
I talked to your boss and your bosses today. Not negatively, but said that this was the type of thing that surfaced inadvertently.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So do you have a question still?
You have a question while we're checking on you? Okay, she's almost done. You want to just finish up this slide?
Yeah. Alrighty, and so we understand that this has been a long process to get the Moss Landing Community Plan updated. So we just want to encourage you all to stay involved throughout the process until the very end. The policies that you see today may change based on the approval process that the Moss Landing Community Plan will have to go through. So it is crucial to provide both county staff and the hearing bodies with your feedback throughout the entirety of the process. And lastly, again, comments are due by Wednesday, April 30th, and they can be emailed to Mike Novo at novom@countyofmonterey.gov or Moss Landing CP update at countyofmonterey.gov. Comments can also be mailed to us using the address listed on the screen. The address is also listed on the packets that have been provided today. And you can also contact Mike Novo at his email listed or on this or at his phone number, which is 831-755-5172. Thank you again for coming tonight. Now we can take some more comments.
Thanks for the presentation. And thank you for all the hard work. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Moss Landing Harbor District. Tom Rizeka is sick, with the flu in bed, poor guy could barely talk, so, he ended up getting the big team here tonight. Couple of, actually, 8 comments, most of which are short. A letter from the Moss Landing Harbor District regarding this bill will be forthcoming, before the 30th of April. So you can make a note of that, expect that to arrive. A comments letter regarding the draft plan will be presented to Mr. Novo probably before the end of next week, but certainly before the 30th of November. And that
Not November.
30th of April. And that leads me to the written comments that will be presented tonight. My understanding, as some people know, I played a role in writing the original community plan in 1982, the California Coastal Commission requests for that did subsequently going to be the California Governor's Office. Specifically, raised the memo that presented to you tonight. We requested policy from the Coastal Commission staff violate, according to my review.
There's about 2 years. It's gonna go far.
Also express statutes authorizing the Muslim district. Harbor District believes that the California Department of Parks needs to be mandated to install guarantee the success of a vegetative planting on the dunes in the North Harbor. Those dunes continue to erode because of the lack of maintenance by the Department of Beaches and Parks. We need to install native vegetation there, not only fund it, install it, but maintain it so that those dunes are stabilized throughout the plan and the revisions. There's a discussion about coastal erosion, and at this point in time, the most obvious example of coastal erosion is that control dune. But the district believes that's the responsibility of the state of California since they're the owners of the real estate. Secondly, Moss Landing Harbor District asks that because of the other issues that have been raised, the Harbor District's authorizing statute be recognized in the local coastal plan. So nothing more than a reference would be acceptable, but it's the law. It's been the law since 1947. It was an updated law in 1967, substantially extended, and the authority of the district and articulating the authority the district has over titles and public trust resources. Rather than guess, it would be better just to reference what the law is. Thirdly, there are 2 bills that are currently pending in the state legislature that are introduced this week. One by Assembly Person Addis and one by Senator Blair. I don't know if you guys have seen those, but if you have, it may be appropriate for you to monitor those and incorporate whatever provisions are provided for in those in that legislation into the implementing policies.
Do you have details on which ones? Because I know they've talked about a few.
There are 2 that directly apply to district.
Okay.
You know what they are?
Yeah, I went to a conference last week about them.
Good.
PB 303.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
D 283.
Thank you.
And I think your time is pretty appropriate now to take what's in those pieces of legislation, which I think clearly have passed, and incorporate them into your long-term policies for the area. Our district thinks that too. There's only one last comment in regards to traffic. There are references to various traffic studies that have been conducted one of which is by AMBAG, but there's no reference in here to the AMBAG's population projections and ongoing housing requirements that have been identified for Santa Cruz County, Monterey County municipalities there. And those that housing projection and the population projections indicate that traffic on California State Highway 1 is going to increase by at least 30% in the next 20 years. The absence of a reference to that, I think, diminishes the necessity of fixing the road. And so simply referring to those existing studies, one was produced by AMBAG, the other one by California Department of Housing and Community Development, with a date reference so you know which studies were being referred to, will give guidance to Caltrans and the county in planning regional improvements for Highway 1. Beyond that, we'll have comment letters in later.
Will all these comments be incorporated in the
They
letter?
will, they'll be incorporated in the comment letter.
That'll help us not forget something.
Nope. Thanks.
Anybody else like to make a comment? And we'll check on Zoom as well.
Just quickly, I want to sort of segue from what Mr. Del Piero was saying about highway expansion. We would like to see, the supervisor would like to see more robust language around endorsing the expansion of Highway 1 into a safe 4 lanes. That's been on the books since 1982. And we would like to see that language returned more strongly than it is currently in the draft that I'm looking at. Thank you. Not right now.
I don't look at it quite here.
Hello, my name is Liza, future of the Transportation Agency in Monterey County. And I'm about to start a planning, it's called a planning and environmental future study focused on highway here, going through Moss Landing, 11 Prince Lou. So that process will analyze potential alternatives. Really at this stage, but it's going to be a very community stakeholder geared process. So it'll go for the next 2 years. There'll be lots more information about how you all can participate.
Anybody else like to comment? Go on there.
We have someone on
Go
Zoom
ahead.
really quick.
Go on Zoom.
Hello, and thank you again, and I'm grateful to see the Moss Landing Harbor District, playing a part and the conversations of the highway and the Dolan intersection being addressed. But something I wanted to throw out there that's been crossing my mind since the Vistra fire, as a resident community member, is the implementation, the use of cattails, which are not invasive in California and can survive in brackish water and are known for handling heavy metals and being able to process them and protect them. I love the idea of adding vegetation around the harbor for multiple reasons, and I'm sure that we could get community involvement for that to help alleviate some of those costs. But I think that, as elementary as it sounds, the use of native plants such as cattails to help absorb the heavy metals that have been present in the harbor in the past, and also to address the new heavy metals that have been introduced, might be something to discuss or include when considering development and protection of erosion in this coastal area.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Donnan, I'm the chair of the Surfrider Foundation locally here in Monterey County. We would agree with the last comment that was just made, along with Harbor stance of dune restoration being a priority. And we appreciate that your outline has a preference for non-structural designs. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I know I'm not here to comment. I know Mr. Del Piero left. I did want to say that, while we crafted the policies and the regulations in a way that we thought would be supportable, by coastal commission staff, we were the ones that, wrote them. So, if there are issues or concerns, I think that we should address them. I didn't want it to feel like a pun.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said earlier, we're trying to find that balance where we can get coastal commission certification. You know, our North County plan is very protective of resources and we have. I mean, look at Moss Landing, it's all about resources all around. So we're very protective of resources and we're gonna be very strict on that. We always have been. We're gonna continue to be. These regulations continue to do that. But there are some implications for your property rights. So just wanna make sure you all really think about what we're writing here. And as he said, comment to us. We wanna find that balance.
Now, this may sound stupid, but I just wonder, when is this gonna end? I just can't believe that we're still talking about planning and then we have this thing like the battery fire and it becomes sort of a footnote to all of this, but it's a major thing for the planning for our future but I've been to so many meetings and we're planning and planning and planning and it never ends. It's 43 years. It seems insane to me. Just my opinion.
I'm
Is
feeling
it
it
yet?
too because I've been.
Is there
through a
an
lot.
end? I mean,
There is.
is it a end?
Yeah, we are currently writing the draft EIR for this, which will then allow us to go to the planning commission, board and coastal commission. So we think we're in the last year of process.
Is that EIR gonna include to something like the best,
And absolutely, it's one of the risks for the environment, so it will be analyzed in the EIR. Any other comments, questions? We really encourage you to get your thoughts in writing to us. I think it's easier for us to deal with that than trying to us interpret what you said. So if you can put it in writing, I think that's clearer for us to then wrestle with and finalizing these regulations. We will be putting out the rest of the regulations in the next couple of weeks, I think. So that'll be another set of information for you to go through. You'll see most of it has to do with the North County Coastal Implementation Plan. That's been fairly substantially rewritten. The part one of our zoning ordinance has got some minor edits, but important ones. So we want you to look at both of those sections as we put those out over the next couple of weeks. So that will be coming out very soon.
And I guess by rest of the regulations, we mean the coastal implementation plan sections that talk about the other chapters of the community plan. So there's one on visual resources, so there'll be regulations that accompany that. One on cultural resources, there will be regulations that accompany that.
Yeah, the whole community plan regulations. Yep.
Thank you for attending, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
yeah, well,
Hey, if you guys have all of this.
so today.
And for the people on Zoom, we're gonna be stopping the meeting now.
Find some location.